I always thought Claire and I had the perfect marriage. 11 years, 2 amazing kids, and a life that felt like a warm, comforting rhythm. We weren't rich, but we were doing well enough. Our house in the suburbs was cozy, complete with a pool the kids loved, and Claire had an inheritance that gave her a financial cushion. I respected that money as hers, a legacy from her parents, and I never pried. Trust was the cornerstone of our relationship, or so I thought. The first crack appeared on a sunny Thursday morning when Claire called me in a panic. Her voice was laced with worry, unlike her usual calm demeanor. "James, I need you to cancel our credit cards immediately," she blurted out. "My purse was stolen at the hotel lobby last night." Her words came fast, and I could hear the tension behind them. She was away on one of her monthly work trips, a few days in a different city, coordinating events for her marketing firm. Claire traveled often, and I never questioned it. If anything, I admired how she managed her career with grace. I tried to calm her down, reassuring her that I'd handle the cards. But something about her story didn't sit right with me. She rarely left things unattended, especially not something as important as her purse. "Are you okay, though?" I asked, pushing the unease aside. "You didn't lose anything else valuable, did you?" "Just some cash and my driver's license," she said quickly, as if she'd rehearsed the response. "The hotel staff is looking into it." I brushed off the nagging feeling and moved on with my day. Life went on as usual, kids, work, dinner, but that little twinge of doubt stayed with me. A few weeks later, while sorting through our home office for insurance documents, I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see. Claire's bank account statement. I'd always respected her privacy, especially when it came to the inheritance, but curiosity got the better of me. The account had grown considerably, over $400,000. Good for her, I thought at first. But then I noticed a withdrawal, $3,000, made shortly after her stolen purse incident. It wasn't the amount that caught my attention, it was the recipient. A jewelry store in the same city where her purse was supposedly taken. I stared at the statement, my mind racing. Claire hadn't mentioned buying jewelry. Certainly not for me. My chest tightened as a cold realization began to settle in. Why would she hide this? I couldn't let it go. The next day, I called the jewelry store, trying to sound casual. "Hi, I'm James Richards," I said. "My wife, Claire, made a purchase at your store recently. She mentioned there might be a warranty issue?" The woman on the other end was polite, eager to help. She pulled up the records and hesitated for a moment before responding. "Oh yes, I remember this transaction. Your wife was replacing her wedding and engagement rings. She said they were stolen?" "Stolen?" My heart sank. Claire never told me her rings were missing. The implications hit me like a truck. Why would she need to replace them if she wasn't wearing them? And if they were stolen, why didn't she tell me? I thanked the woman and hung up, my head spinning. Every explanation pointed to one thing: Claire wanted to appear single. That night, I couldn't look at her the same. As she breezed into the house, laughing with the kids, I felt like I was watching a stranger. She kissed me on the cheek, her perfume wrapping around me in a way that used to feel comforting. Now, it smelled like deception. "I miss you," she said, her smile as radiant as ever. But I noticed her phone, clutched tighter than usual, always angled away from me. "Did you?" I asked, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Her smile faltered, just for a second. "Of course, James. Why wouldn't I?" As we lay in bed later that night, her hand brushed against my arm, her touch tentative. She leaned closer, her breath warm against my neck. But I couldn't respond. My mind was too preoccupied, replaying every inconsistency, every late-night work call, every unexplained expense. Claire's fingers traced patterns on my chest, a gesture that used to drive me wild. But now, it felt calculated. Like she was trying to distract me. "Is everything okay?" she whispered, her voice laced with faux concern. I forced a smile. "Just tired." She didn't push further, and for the first time in years, I felt a chasm between us. The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. I called the hotel where Claire had stayed during her trip, asking for their report on the stolen purse. The manager was cooperative, even faxing me a copy of Claire's written account. She claimed her purse had been taken while she was dancing in the hotel ballroom. Dancing? Claire hated dancing. And why would she leave her purse unattended? The report also mentioned her reluctance to involve the police, which struck me as odd. She was usually pragmatic and cautious, especially in situations like this. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together, and the picture wasn't pretty. I needed answers, but more than that, I needed proof. That evening, as Claire showered, I unlocked her phone using the passcode I'd memorized months ago. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages, my stomach churning with every swipe. What I found made my blood run cold. I sat in the dim glow of our bedroom, Claire's phone in my trembling hands. Each swipe across the screen felt like peeling away another layer of the life I thought I knew. My heart pounded in my chest as I scrolled through her messages, trying to piece together the truth without letting my emotions spiral out of control. The first few conversations were innocuous enough, texts with her boss about deadlines, reminders from the kids' school. But then I saw a thread labeled simply AM. My gut tightened as I clicked on it. The messages were vague at first, almost playful. AM, you looked stunning last night. Wish we had more time. Claire, you know I can't stay too long. Someone might notice. AM, he doesn't seem to notice much. I swallowed hard, my stomach churning. The timestamps coincided with her last business trip. The same trip where her purse had been stolen. Each message felt like a dagger. I kept reading, the texts growing bolder as I scrolled further back. AM, that dress was almost as breathtaking as what was underneath it. Claire, you're terrible. AM, you love it. Just like I love you. Love? My head spun. It wasn't just a fling. This was something deeper, something that had taken root in the shadows of our marriage. A noise from the bathroom jolted me back to the present. The shower shut off, and I heard Claire humming softly. Panic surged through me as I quickly locked her phone and placed it back on the nightstand. My mind raced with questions I wasn't ready to answer. Who was AM? How long had this been going on? And why hadn't I seen it before? Claire stepped out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, her damp hair cascading over her shoulders. She smiled at me, her cheeks flushed from the heat of the shower. It was the same smile that used to light up my world, but now it felt like a mask. What are you doing just sitting there? She asked, her voice light. She crossed the room, her bare feet padding softly on the carpet, and climbed into bed beside me. You've been so quiet lately. Is something on your mind? The irony of her question made me want to laugh. Or scream. I'm fine, I said, forcing my voice to sound steady. Just a lot on my plate at work. She leaned in closer, her towel loosening slightly. You work too hard, James. You should relax more. Her lips brushed my neck, her hands slipping under my shirt. It was a move that would have melted me just days ago. But now, every touch felt wrong, tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal. I didn't know how to respond, so I let her lead. Her lips moved down to my collarbone, her breath warm against my skin. I closed my eyes, trying to focus, trying to find the connection we once had. But all I could see was the screen of her phone, the messages to AM, the words. I love you. Stop, I said suddenly, my voice sharper than I intended. Claire froze, her eyes searching mine. James? What's wrong? Her tone was soft, but I could see the flicker of panic in her expression. I'm not feeling great, I lied, pulling away from her. Maybe we can pick this up another time. She nodded slowly, biting her lip. Okay. But if something's bothering you, you can tell me. I wanted to scream, to shout the truth at her and demand answers. But I wasn't ready, not yet. I needed to know more. I needed to figure out who AM was and how deep this went before I confronted her. The next morning, I couldn't shake the image of those messages. As Claire bustled around the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the kids, I watched her like a hawk. She laughed, joked with the kids, and kissed me on the cheek before heading out for work, her behavior so normal it made my skin crawl. As soon as she was gone, I dove into action. I opened her laptop, praying she hadn't changed the password. To my relief, it was the same as always. Within minutes, I was digging through her emails, searching for anything that might point to her mystery lover. It didn't take long to find something. A string of receipts caught my attention: hotel bookings, expensive dinners, even lingerie. They were all tied to the dates of her supposed work trips. My blood boiled as I scanned the details. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Then I found the confirmation I dreaded. An email with the subject line, "Dinner Friday?" The sender's name was Andrew Miller. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the name. Andrew was a colleague of hers, someone she'd mentioned in passing before. I'd even met him once at a company party, a tall, smooth-talking guy with an easy smile. He didn't seem like much at the time, but now the thought of him made my fists clench. The email thread revealed everything. Andrew was her AM, and their relationship was far more serious than I'd imagined. They weren't just meeting for secret trysts. They were planning weekends away, discussing their future, even mocking me in their private conversations. I felt sick. Betrayed. Humiliated. But amidst the storm of emotions, one thought burned brighter than the rest: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If Claire thought she could lie to me, cheat on me, and get away with it, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. For the rest of the day, I walked around in a daze, replaying everything I'd uncovered about Claire's betrayal. Andrew Miller? A colleague. The man I'd shaken hands with at a company event. The man I'd trusted to be nothing more than a co-worker in her professional life. Now, he was so much more, a snake slithering into the heart of my marriage. The emails and texts had painted a vivid picture of their relationship, but I wasn't done. I needed more evidence, something undeniable, something that left no room for lies or excuses. If I was going to confront Claire, I needed to be armed to the teeth with the truth. That evening, I kept up the charade, playing the role of the unsuspecting husband. Dinner was a quiet affair. Claire chatted about her day while the kids filled the gaps with stories about school. I nodded and smiled in all the right places, but inside, I was screaming. After dinner, Claire took her laptop into the living room, claiming she needed to check her schedule for the next week. My heart raced as I watched her type, imagining the messages she might be exchanging with Andrew. I excused myself to the bathroom but took a detour to the home office, where her work bag sat on the desk. My hands moved automatically, rifling through the contents. I found her planner, a leather-bound book she carried everywhere. Flipping through it, I scanned the entries, looking for anything that stood out. Then I saw it. Friday, dinner at 8 a.m. The words were underlined with a small heart drawn beside them. My jaw clenched as I stared at the page. She was planning to see him this week. Another date, another lie. I put the planner back exactly as I'd found it, my hands shaking. This wasn't just some fling. It was calculated. Planned. She was building a life with him, one stolen moment at a time, while I sat at home like a fool. Later that night, as Claire slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, formulating a plan. It wasn't enough to confront her with what I'd found. I wanted to catch her in the act, to see the look on her face when she realized she couldn't deny it anymore. The next day, I called in a favor from an old friend, Matt. He worked in private security, and owed me for helping him rebuild his patio last summer. When I explained the situation, he didn't hesitate. "You sure about this, James?" Matt asked, his voice heavy with concern. "Once you go down this road, there's no coming back." "I'm sure," I replied, the anger in my voice making it clear I wasn't in the mood for second thoughts. "Can you help me or not?" Matt sighed. "Yeah, I'll set it up. I'll get you the tracking app and cameras. You'll have everything you need by tomorrow." The rest of the day was a blur. I went through the motions at work, barely registering what anyone said. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Claire and Andrew, imagining them together, their stolen moments, their whispered promises. That night, I installed the tracking app on Claire's phone while she was in the shower. It was easier than I expected, just a quick download and a few taps to hide the icon. I felt a pang of guilt as I watched the app sync with my phone, but I shoved it down. Whatever privacy I was invading was nothing compared to the betrayal she'd inflicted on me. On Thursday night, Matt dropped off the equipment, a small camera disguised as a charger and a GPS tracker that could fit under a car. I thanked him, my hands gripping the box tightly. "Take it easy, James," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Whatever you find, don't do anything stupid." "Thanks, Matt. I'll be fine," I replied, though I wasn't sure I believed it. The next morning, before Claire left for work, I installed the GPS tracker under her car. The camera would have to wait until she was out of the house. She kissed me goodbye, her lips soft against mine, and for a moment, I almost faltered. But then I remembered the texts, the emails, the planner. The heart next to his name. As soon as she was gone, I set up the camera in the living room, angling it to capture the entire space. If she brought him here, into my home, I wanted to see it. That night, I checked the GPS app on my phone. As expected, she was at the office during the day. But around 6:30 p.m., her car moved. I followed the little red dot as it stopped at an upscale restaurant downtown. Dinner with Andrew. My hands tightened around the phone as I imagined them sitting in a dimly lit booth, laughing, sharing food, exchanging stolen touches. I wanted to drive there and confront them, to rip the illusion apart in front of everyone. But I didn't. Not yet. When Claire came home later that night, she was glowing, her cheeks flushed in a way that used to be for me. She kissed me on the cheek and went upstairs to shower, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. I sat on the couch, staring at the camera I'd set up earlier. I felt like a predator lying in wait, ready to pounce. But the hunt wasn't over yet. Friday came, and I watched her every move like a hawk. She left the house around 7 p.m., dressed in a black dress that hugged her curves and heels that clicked confidently against the floor. She looked stunning, and it made me sick to my stomach. "Work dinner," she said breezily as she kissed me goodbye. I smiled. "Have fun." But as soon as she left, I grabbed my keys. Tonight, I wasn't staying home. I waited 5 minutes after Claire left before grabbing my jacket and heading to the car. My pulse thundered in my ears as I opened the GPS app and saw the red dot moving steadily down Main Street. She was on her way, and I wasn't far behind. The night air was crisp, the streets alive with the hum of weekend traffic. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than I realized as I followed the tracker, weaving through cars, careful not to get too close. The app showed her destination, a boutique hotel on the edge of downtown. My stomach churned as I pulled into the lot across the street, parking in the shadows. Her car was there, unmistakable under the warm glow of the parking lights. I waited, my heart pounding, until I saw her step out. She looked breathtaking in that black dress, her hair cascading over her shoulders like waves of silk. And she wasn't alone. Andrew. He was taller than I remembered, his confident stride making my blood boil. He walked beside her, his hand brushing against the small of her back in a way that felt both casual and possessive. I gritted my teeth, watching as they exchanged smiles, the ease of their familiarity cutting deeper than I thought possible. I grabbed my phone, the camera app trembling slightly as I held it up to record. The video wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Claire, laughing at something he said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Andrew, leaning in as though he couldn't get close enough. They disappeared into the hotel lobby. I sat in my car, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. I'd known this was coming, but nothing prepared me for the sight of her walking into that place with another man. After a few minutes of wrestling with my emotions, I made a decision. I couldn't just sit there. I needed to see this through. The lobby was warm and elegant, the kind of place where polished floors reflected the light of crystal chandeliers. I kept my head down as I approached the front desk, my heart hammering in my chest. The receptionist looked up with a practiced smile. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you?" I forced myself to return her smile. I'm meeting someone here, but I forgot which room they're in. Andrew Miller? He checked in earlier this evening. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered with hesitation. I'm sorry, sir. We can't give out that information. Right, I said quickly, trying to play it cool. Of course. No problem. I walked away, cursing under my breath. I'd hoped for an easy answer, but it wasn't going to be that simple. I spotted an elevator at the far end of the lobby and made my way toward it, my nerves buzzing. A young couple stepped out as I approached, their laughter light and carefree. I stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. It was a gamble, but I had a feeling. Andrew didn't seem like the type to settle for anything less than the best. The elevator ride was agonizingly slow. My mind raced with images of Claire and Andrew, alone in a room, their laughter mingling with whispered promises. My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms as the doors slid open. The hallway was quiet, the thick carpet muffling my steps. I moved slowly, scanning the doors for any sign of them. Then I heard it, a soft laugh, faint but unmistakable, coming from behind one of the doors. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. My mind screamed at me to burst in, to confront them, to shatter their world as they had shattered mine. But I hesitated. I needed to think this through. Instead of knocking, I pulled out my phone, activating the voice recorder. I held it close to the door, straining to hear every word. Their voices were muffled, but Claire's laugh was unmistakable. It was the laugh she used to reserve for me, full of warmth and joy. Now it felt like a betrayal. Do you ever think about the future? Claire's voice was soft, almost hesitant. Of course, Andrew replied. I think about us. About how things could be once, you know. I clenched my teeth, fury coursing through me. They were planning something. This wasn't just a fling, this was a full-blown betrayal. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, torn between rage and heartbreak. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped the phone into my pocket and headed back to the elevator, my chest heaving with suppressed emotions. In the car, I listened to the recording, the sound of their voices twisting the knife deeper. Claire wasn't the woman I thought she was. The life we'd built together, the trust we'd shared, it was all a lie. But I wasn't done. Not yet. That night, Claire came home late, her cheeks flushed, her lips curved into a satisfied smile. She slid into bed beside me, the scent of her perfume mingling with something unfamiliar. I lay still, pretending to be asleep, my back turned to her. "Good night, James," she whispered, her voice tender, as though nothing had changed. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mind was too consumed with the plan forming in the darkness. She thought she had the upper hand. She thought her lies could go on forever. But she was wrong. I didn't sleep that night. Claire's whispered "good night" had hung in the air like a mocking challenge, a reminder of the double life she thought she was so cleverly maintaining. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word from the recording, every laugh, every hint of their shared plans. It wasn't just betrayal, it was the sheer audacity of it. She was plotting her future with another man while lying in the bed we'd shared for over a decade. If she thought I would crumble quietly, she didn't know me at all. By the time the first rays of morning light seeped through the curtains, I had a plan. I wouldn't just confront her, I would expose her. Claire was already in the kitchen by the time I came downstairs, her movements precise and graceful as she prepared breakfast for the kids. She hummed softly to herself, a tune I didn't recognize. For a moment I just stood there, watching her. It was surreal, the way she could act so normal, so unbothered, after what she'd done the night before. "Morning," she said with a smile when she saw me. "Coffee's ready." "Thanks." I forced a smile as I poured myself a cup, the warmth of the mug grounding me. She leaned against the counter, her hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. "I was thinking we should do something as a family this weekend. Maybe take the kids to the park?" The suggestion was almost laughable. I wanted to ask if she planned to squeeze us in between rendezvous with Andrew, but I bit my tongue. Sounds good, I said instead, keeping my tone even. As soon as Claire left for work, I sprang into action. The camera in the living room had recorded her return last night, but I needed more. Something definitive. Something that left no room for her manipulation or excuses. I reviewed the footage on my laptop, fast-forwarding through hours of empty silence until I saw her walk through the door. She looked radiant, her cheeks flushed, her dress slightly wrinkled. She set her bag down on the couch, pulled out her phone, and began typing. Probably messaging him, I thought bitterly. But then she did something that caught me off guard. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, wrapped package. She held it for a moment, a smile playing on her lips, before tucking it away in the drawer of the side table. What the hell was that? My curiosity burned. I waited until the house was empty before retrieving the package. It was small, neatly wrapped in plain brown paper with no distinguishing marks. My hands shook slightly as I unwrapped it, revealing a delicate gold bracelet with a tiny charm, a heart engraved with the initials A and C. I stared at the bracelet, a wave of anger and heartbreak crashing over me. She was carrying tokens of their relationship, tangible proof of the connection she shared with him. This wasn't just a fling, it was a full-blown romance. I rewrapped the bracelet and put it back exactly as I'd found it. My mind churned with ideas, each more vindictive than the last. But one thing was clear, this was war. That evening, I decided to test the waters. Over dinner, I brought up her work. "How's everything going at the office?" I asked casually, cutting into my steak. "Busy as always," she replied, not missing a beat. "We've got a big project coming up. Lots of late nights ahead. Must be exhausting," I said, watching her carefully. "You should take a break. Maybe spend more time at home." She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "Oh, you know me. I like to stay busy." I nodded, hiding my clenched jaw behind a sip of water. She was so confident, so comfortable in her lies. It only made me more determined. The next day, I took my plan to the next level. I called Matt and told him I needed surveillance on Claire. "I need pictures, videos, timestamps, everything," I said. "James, are you sure about this?" Matt asked, his tone cautious. "Once you have this evidence, there's no going back." "I've already passed that point," I said firmly. "Just do it." Over the next few days, Matt sent me updates. Photos of Claire meeting Andrew at a coffee shop. Footage of them sharing a lingering kiss in the parking lot. A receipt for a hotel booking in Andrew's name, paid with Claire's credit card. Every new piece of evidence felt like a punch to the gut, but it also fueled my resolve. By Friday, I had a folder full of damning proof. I stared at it for hours, imagining how I would use it. Part of me wanted to confront her right away, to throw it all in her face and demand answers. But another part of me wanted to bide my time, to gather even more evidence and expose her on my terms. That night, as Claire got ready for another work dinner, I watched her from the doorway of our bedroom. She looked stunning in a fitted red dress, her lips painted a deep crimson. My heart ached at the sight of her, the woman I had loved so deeply, now a stranger hiding behind lies. "You look beautiful," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She turned to me, surprised. "Thank you?" She hesitated, then added, "I'll try not to be too late." "Take your time," I said with a faint smile. "Enjoy yourself." She kissed my cheek before leaving, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air long after she was gone. As soon as she was out the door, I grabbed the folder of evidence and placed it in the middle of the dining room table. I opened it, arranging the photos and printouts into a neat display. The bracelet, unwrapped and gleaming under the overhead light, took center stage. I poured myself a drink and sat down, waiting. Tonight, when she came home, there would be no more lies. The glass of whiskey in my hand was half empty by the time I heard the familiar hum of Claire's car pulling into the driveway. My heart raced, a mixture of anticipation, anger, and heartbreak. The evidence was spread out across the dining room table, a collection of every betrayal, every lie, every stolen moment. There would be no more pretending, no more masks. Tonight, everything would come to light. The front door opened, and Claire's heels clicked against the hardwood floor. "James?" she called, her voice cheerful. "I'm home." I stayed silent, letting her footsteps draw closer. When she walked into the dining room and saw me sitting there, her smile faltered. Her gaze moved to the table, her eyes widening as she took in the photos, the receipts, the bracelet. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in years, Claire looked completely off balance. "Go ahead," I said, my voice cold. "Explain." She stared at me, her face a mix of shock and confusion. What is this?" she stammered. I leaned back in my chair, swirling the whiskey in my glass. "This," I said, gesturing to the table, "is the truth. The truth about you, about Andrew, about everything you've been hiding." Her hands trembled as she reached for one of the photos. It was a shot of her and Andrew at the hotel, his arm draped possessively around her waist. "James, I can explain." "Explain?" I interrupted, slamming the glass down on the table. "Explain what, Claire? That you've been sneaking around with your coworker? That you've been lying to me, to our kids, to everyone? What part of this do you think can be explained?" She flinched at my outburst, but then her expression hardened. "You've been spying on me?" The sheer audacity of her response made me laugh, a bitter, humorless sound. "Spying on you? Is that really what you're going with? After all this?" I gestured to the table again. "You cheated, Claire. You lied. Don't you dare try to make me the villain here." Her defiance crumbled, and she sank into the chair across from me. Her eyes glistened with tears, but I didn't let myself feel pity. "Not yet. I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "Well, congratulations," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You failed spectacularly." She reached for the bracelet, her fingers brushing the delicate gold chain. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said softly. "I didn't mean for it to happen." My fist clenched, my nails digging into my palms. "Then why, Claire? Why would you do this to us? To me?" She hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "It started out innocent," she said finally. "Andrew and I were just friends. We talked about work, about life. He made me feel seen." "Seen?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're telling me you destroyed our marriage because you wanted attention?" "No, it's not like that," she snapped, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You don't understand, James. You've been so distant lately. Always busy with work, always stressed. I felt like I was invisible to you. So your solution was to run into someone else's arms?" I shot back. "To sneak around behind my back instead of talking to me?" She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I don't know what I was thinking. It just happened." "It didn't just happen, Claire," I said, my voice cold. "This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice, a series of choices. You chose to text him, to meet him, to lie to me. Over and over again you chose him." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't soften. I couldn't. Not after everything I'd seen, everything I'd learned. "I loved you, Claire," I said, my voice breaking. "I trusted you. And you threw it all away." The room fell silent except for her quiet sobs. I stared at her, searching for some glimmer of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I thought I knew. But all I saw was a stranger. Finally, she lifted her head, her tear-streaked face filled with desperation. "I want to fix this," she said. "I want to fix us." I let out a bitter laugh. "Fix us? How? How do you fix something you've shattered?" "Please, James," she begged. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll end things with Andrew. I'll go to counseling. I'll—" "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "Don't sit there and make promises you can't keep. You made your choice, Claire. And now, I'm making mine." Her eyes widened in panic. "What does that mean?" "It means this marriage is over." I said, my voice steady. I'm done. No, she cried, jumping to her feet. Please, James. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. I'm not the one who threw it away, I said, standing to face her. You did. She reached for me, her hands gripping my arms. I'll do anything, she said, her voice trembling. Just give me a chance to make it right. I pulled away from her, the weight of my decision settling in my chest. You had your chance, Claire. And you destroyed it. Her sobs followed me as I walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the evidence of her betrayal. I didn't look back. In the quiet of the bedroom, I sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion washing over me. I had done what I needed to do, but the pain was still there, raw and unrelenting. The life I thought I had was gone, replaced by a mess I couldn't begin to unravel. But one thing was clear, this was the beginning of the end. And there was no turning back. The silence in the house the next morning was suffocating. Claire was still here, of course. Where else would she go? But she hadn't dared come near me. I stayed in the bedroom for most of the morning, staring blankly at the ceiling. The ache in my chest was a constant reminder of the betrayal I'd uncovered and the decision I'd made. But I couldn't stay in that room forever. I had things to do. Plans to set in motion. When I finally emerged, Claire was in the kitchen, standing by the sink and staring out the window. She didn't turn around when she heard me, and I didn't offer a greeting. Instead, I grabbed a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, keeping my distance. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold but steady. She flinched, setting her mug down carefully on the counter. About what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I set my coffee down with a sharp clink. About what happens next. She turned to face me then, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with desperation. James, please. Can't we just take some time? Think this through? I've thought about it, Claire. I replied, my tone cutting. And nothing changes the fact that you betrayed me. You lied to me, to our kids, to everyone. There's no coming back from that. Her face crumpled, and tears spilled down her cheeks. I'll do whatever it takes, she said, stepping closer. I'll cut off all contact with Andrew. I'll go to therapy. Stop, I interrupted, holding up a hand. You don't get to bargain your way out of this. It's done. We're done. She collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table, her sobs muffled by her hands. I felt a pang of something, pity maybe, but it wasn't enough to soften me. Not after everything. I'm filing for divorce, I said flatly, and the words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and final. She looked up at me, her face pale. You don't mean that. I do, I said. I've already started looking for a lawyer. Her mouth opened, then closed again, as though she couldn't find the words to argue. Finally, she whispered, What about the kids? That question stopped me in my tracks. For all my anger and pain, I hadn't fully considered how this would affect them. Jeremy and Melissa were my world, and the thought of dragging them through this mess made my stomach churn. They don't need to know the details, I said after a moment. Not yet. But they will know this was your doing, Claire. I'm not going to let them think this was my fault. Her eyes flashed with a mix of guilt and anger. So that's it? You're just going to paint me as the villain? If the shoe fits, I said coldly, turning away from her. You made this bed, Claire. Now you get to lie in it. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I couldn't stand to be in the same house as her, so I spent most of my time at the park, walking aimlessly and trying to clear my head. I thought about our kids, our home, the life we'd built together. And I thought about how it had all been built on a foundation that Claire had decided to burn to the ground. When I finally returned home, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the front yard. The house felt different now, colder, emptier, even though nothing had physically changed. That evening, I sent an email to the law firm Matt had recommended. I explained my situation briefly, asking for a consultation as soon as possible. It felt surreal, taking this step, but there was no turning back now. Claire spent the evening in the living room, curled up on the couch with a blanket, staring blankly at the TV. She looked so small, so defeated, but I couldn't let myself care. Not anymore. The next day, I woke up to find a note on the kitchen counter. Claire's handwriting was shaky, the words hurried. James, I'm taking the kids to my sister's for the day. We need some space. Please think about what you're doing. Claire. I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. Space? That was the least of what I needed. With the house to myself, I began to organize my thoughts. I gathered the evidence Matt had helped me collect, placing it neatly in a folder labeled Divorce. I went through financial documents, making notes of shared accounts, debts, and assets. I wasn't just going to walk away from this. I was going to ensure Claire didn't get to take advantage of me one more time. I also started drafting a letter to the kids, explaining things in a way they could understand. It wasn't an easy task, and I found myself choking up more than once. But they deserved the truth, or at least as much of it as they could handle. By the time Claire returned with the kids that evening, I had everything in place. She gave me a wary glance as she walked through the door, but I ignored her, focusing on Jeremy and Melissa. Hey, Dad! Jeremy said, running up to me. We went to Aunt Sarah's, and she made cookies. Yeah, and she let us play with her puppy. Melissa chimed in, her eyes bright. I hugged them both tightly, savoring the innocence they still had. It was a stark contrast to the storm swirling around us. Claire watched us from the doorway, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought she might say something, but she simply turned and walked away. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be arguments, tears, and moments of doubt. But as I sat with my kids that evening, listening to their stories and watching them laugh, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for them. For their future. For a life that wasn't tainted by lies and betrayal. The following Monday, I sat in the polished office of Graham and Parker Law Firm, waiting for my consultation. The firm came highly recommended by Matt, and I wasn't about to go into this fight unarmed. I needed someone who could help me navigate the legal battlefield and ensure Claire didn't walk away with more than she deserved. A sharp-looking man in his late 40s entered the room, his tailored suit and confident demeanor giving me a sense of reassurance. He extended his hand with a firm grip. Mr. Richards, I'm Mark Graham. Let's talk about how we can make this as smooth as possible for you. I handed over the folder of evidence I'd painstakingly compiled. This should give you a good idea of what's been going on, I said. Mark flipped through the photos, receipts, and emails, his expression remaining neutral but his brow furrowing slightly as he absorbed the details. This is thorough, he said, glancing up at me. You've done your homework. I can't afford not to, I replied, my tone bitter. She betrayed me, and I'm not about to let her play the victim in this. Mark nodded. I understand. Based on what I see here, we have a strong case for adultery, though it might not carry as much weight depending on your state's divorce laws. Let's go over your priorities. What do you want out of this? I hesitated for a moment, then laid it out. First and foremost, I want custody of my kids. They're my world, and I don't trust her judgment anymore. Second, I don't want her walking away with a cent more than she's entitled to. I'm willing to split things fairly, but I'm not going to reward her for what she's done. Mark took notes, nodding as he listened. Understandable. Custody battles can get messy, but with the right approach, we can make a strong case for your parenting ability. As for the financials, we'll need to gather a complete picture of your shared assets and liabilities. This includes everything: bank accounts, investments, retirement funds, property, and so on. I've already started compiling that, I said, pulling out another folder. Here's what I have so far. Mark flipped through the documents, nodding in approval. Good. This will save us time. As we discussed the next steps, a wave of emotions washed over me: anger, sadness, determination. I'd always thought of divorce as something that happened to other people, but now it was my reality. And while I hated every second of it, I knew I couldn't back down. Mark closed his notebook and leaned forward. One last thing, James. Are you prepared for the emotional toll this will take? Divorce is never easy, and when infidelity is involved, it gets even messier. Claire will likely push back, especially when it comes to custody. I'm prepared, I said firmly, though the knot in my stomach betrayed me. I have to be. For my kids. By the time I left the office, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and resolve. Mark had given me a clear roadmap, and while it wasn't going to be easy, I finally felt like I had a plan. When I got home, Claire was in the living room, flipping through a magazine. She looked up as I walked in, her expression wary. We hadn't spoken much since our confrontation, and the tension in the house was palpable. "How was your day?" she asked cautiously. "Productive," I replied, my tone clipped. Her eyes flicked to the folder in my hand, and I saw a flicker of fear cross her face. She knew what was coming. Later that evening, I sat down with Jeremy and Melissa, keeping my tone as light as possible. "Hey guys, can we talk for a minute?" They looked up from the game they were playing, their innocent faces making my chest ache. "What's up, Dad?" Jeremy asked. I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Your mom and I are going through a tough time right now," I began. "We've decided that it's best for us to live apart for a while." Melissa's eyes widened, and Jeremy frowned. "Why?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "Sometimes grown-ups have problems they can't fix. But I want you both to know that we love you more than anything. That's not going to change." The conversation was one of the hardest I'd ever had. Melissa cried, clinging to me, while Jeremy sat silently, his expression a mix of confusion and hurt. I held them both, fighting back my own tears. Claire stayed out of sight, leaving me to shoulder the burden alone. When the kids were finally in bed, I found Claire in the kitchen, staring out the window. She turned as I entered, her face pale. "You told them," she said quietly. "They deserve to know," I replied. Her shoulders sagged, and she leaned against the counter. "James, can't we at least try to work this out? For their sake?" I shook my head, my resolve unwavering. The best thing we can do for them is to be honest. And staying in a broken marriage isn't honest. Over the next few days, the reality of our situation began to sink in. Claire tried to act normal, but the strain showed. She avoided me as much as possible, retreating to her room early and leaving the house for hours at a time. I didn't ask where she went. I didn't care. Mark called to let me know he'd filed the initial paperwork, and the process was officially underway. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. One evening, as I was reviewing documents in the office, Claire knocked on the door. She looked hesitant, almost fragile. "Can we talk?" she asked. I gestured for her to sit, though I kept my distance. "What is it?" She twisted her hands nervously. "I know I've made mistakes, huge ones. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm begging you, James, don't take the kids away from me. They're all I have." Her plea hit me harder than I expected. Despite everything, I knew she loved Jeremy and Melissa. But love wasn't enough to erase her betrayal. "They deserve stability, Claire," I said. "And right now, I'm the only one who can give them that." Her tears fell freely, but I didn't waver. This wasn't about her feelings. It was about what was best for our family, and that meant moving forward without her lies. The days blurred together as the divorce proceedings gained momentum. Emails from Mark arrived daily, packed with updates, questions, and forms that required my signature. It felt like I was living in a perpetual state of confrontation, if not with Claire, then with the tangled mess of our marriage as it unraveled under legal scrutiny. Claire, for her part, oscillated between desperation and defiance. One day, she would plead with me to reconsider, her voice thick with tears. The next, she would lash out, accusing me of being cold, unfeeling, and unwilling to give her a second chance. I stayed firm, refusing to engage in her emotional tactics. It was exhausting, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate me again. One evening, as I sat in the office reviewing yet another set of legal documents, Claire appeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Can we talk? She asked, her voice softer than I expected. I glanced up from the papers. About what? About the kids, she said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. James, I know you're angry, and I know I've made mistakes. But you can't take them away from me. I sighed, setting the papers aside. Claire, this isn't about punishment. It's about what's best for them. They need stability, and after everything that's happened, I don't think you can give them that. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might explode. But then she surprised me. She sank into the chair across from me, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I know I've been a terrible wife, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I've always been a good mother. Don't take that away from me, James. Please. Her words stirred something in me, guilt, maybe, or pity. As much as I wanted to protect my kids, I couldn't deny that Claire loved them. And despite her betrayal, she had always been a devoted mother. I don't want to take them away from you, I said finally. But things are going to change. We'll have to figure out custody, visitation, all of it. And it won't be easy. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'll do whatever it takes. I wanted to believe her. For the kids' sake, I hoped she meant it. The next day, Mark called with an update. Claire's attorney reached out, he said. They're pushing for joint custody, with equal time split between the two of you. I gritted my teeth. After everything she's done? She doesn't deserve equal anything. I understand how you feel, Mark said, his tone measured. But the courts favor joint custody unless there's a clear reason to rule otherwise. Claire's infidelity won't carry much weight in that regard. We'll need to focus on demonstrating why you're the more stable parent. And how do we do that? I asked. By showing that you've been the primary caregiver, that your schedule is more conducive to their needs, and that you provide a stable home environment, he explained. We'll also want to highlight any concerns about Claire's judgment or decision-making. I nodded, my mind racing. What about the evidence I've gathered? The photos, the emails, does that help? It might, Mark said. But be prepared for her attorney to push back, possibly even turn the narrative against you. They'll argue that your actions were invasive or controlling. As the weeks went on, the tension between Claire and me reached new heights. The house became a battleground, every interaction laced with unspoken resentment. The kids sensed the tension, and it broke my heart to see the confusion in their eyes. One night, Jeremy came into my room while I was sorting through more legal papers. He stood hesitantly in the doorway, his small frame silhouetted against the hallway light. Dad, are you and Mom going to be okay? He asked, his voice trembling. I set the papers aside and pulled him into a hug. We're going to figure it out, buddy, I said, my voice thick with emotion. No matter what happens, we both love you and Melissa more than anything. That will never change. Meanwhile, Claire's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She started staying out late again, returning home smelling of alcohol and perfume. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I knew it wouldn't accomplish anything. Her choices were her own now, and I refused to let them derail my focus. One night, around midnight, I heard the garage door open. I looked out the window and saw Claire stumbling out of her car, her heels in one hand and her phone in the other. She tripped on the driveway, laughing to herself before catching her balance and heading inside. I stayed in the shadows, watching as she fumbled with the lock. When she finally managed to get the door open, she paused, glancing over her shoulder as if sensing someone was watching. It was in that moment that I realized something. Claire wasn't just broken. She was lost. The next morning, I decided to document everything. I started keeping a detailed journal of her behavior, noting every late-night return, every missed obligation, every questionable decision. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about building a case for the kids. Mark encouraged me to stay the course. Divorce is a marathon, not a sprint, he reminded me. You have to stay patient and focused. Let the facts speak for themselves. By the time our first court date rolled around, I felt both prepared and terrified. Claire's attorney was sharp, poking holes in every argument Mark presented. But Mark held his ground, presenting a clear and compelling case for why I was the better choice for primary custody. Claire, for her part, looked fragile on the stand. She cried as she spoke about her love for the kids, her voice cracking with emotion. But when Mark cross-examined her, the cracks began to show. He brought up her late nights, her questionable spending, and her relationship with Andrew. By the time she stepped down, she looked shaken. As I left the courthouse that day, I felt a small glimmer of hope. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, I felt like I might actually win. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, every moment pressing down on me with unbearable weight. Over the past few weeks, the legal battle with Claire had turned into a war of attrition, with each side presenting their arguments, evidence, and accusations. It wasn't just about custody or assets anymore. It was about proving who was the better parent, who deserved the life we built together, and who didn't. Claire sat across the room, her face a mask of calm, though I knew it was a facade. Her lawyer had spent the last session painting her as a devoted mother who had made a mistake but was willing to do whatever it took to make amends. It was a convincing narrative, but Mark and I were ready to dismantle it. The judge called the court to order, and Mark rose to his feet. Today was our turn to present our final arguments on custody. I felt my stomach churn as Mark approached the bench, his voice steady and clear. Your Honor, my client has consistently demonstrated his commitment to his children's well-being. He has been their primary caregiver, ensuring stability in a time of great upheaval. The evidence we've provided shows that Mrs. Richards has struggled with judgment and decision-making, both during her affair and in the aftermath. Claire's lawyer, a polished woman with sharp eyes, stood up immediately. Objection, Your Honor. We've already established that the affair is irrelevant to her parenting ability. The judge nodded. Sustained. Mr. Graham, please keep your argument focused on custody. Mark adjusted his tie and continued unfazed. Of course, Your Honor. However, it's important to consider the environment the children are exposed to. Late-night absences, erratic behavior, and financial irresponsibility all raise questions about Mrs. Richards' ability to provide the stability these children need. He presented the journal I'd been keeping, documenting Claire's behavior over the past few months. Photos, timestamps, and receipts painted a picture of a woman struggling to maintain control. Claire shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her face pale. When it was my turn to speak, I stood slowly, my palms sweaty but my resolve firm. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. All I've ever wanted is what's best for my kids. I'm not here to punish Claire or take them away from her. I'm here because I believe they deserve a stable home, and right now, I'm the only one who can give them that. I glanced at Claire as I spoke, her eyes shimmering with tears. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about her feelings or mine, it was about the kids. After I finished, the judge adjourned the court for the day. The decision on custody would come later, but for now, the waiting game continued. That evening, the tension in the house was unbearable. Claire and I barely spoke, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. The kids were confused and restless, sensing the strain but not fully understanding it. I tried to keep things normal, helping Jeremy with his homework, playing a board game with Melissa, but my mind was elsewhere. After the kids went to bed, Claire cornered me in the kitchen. Why are you doing this? She demanded, her voice low but trembling with anger. Why are you trying to take them away from me? I met her gaze, my own anger bubbling to the surface. Why am I doing this? Because you gave me no choice, Claire. You made decisions that put them at risk. You lied, you cheated, and now you want to pretend like none of that matters? It doesn't make me a bad mother. She shot back, her voice rising. I've always been there for them, James. Always. Being there physically isn't the same as being there emotionally. I countered. You can't keep living like this and expect me to just hand them over half the time. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out again. But instead, she turned away, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she whispered. Neither did I said quietly, the anger draining out of me. But here we are. The next morning, I met with Mark to discuss our strategy for the final hearing. We're in a strong position, he said, his tone reassuring. But we need to stay sharp. Her lawyer will try to undermine your credibility, so be prepared for anything. What about the kids? I asked. Will they have to testify? Mark hesitated. It's unlikely, but the judge might ask to speak with them privately. If that happens, just trust that they'll speak honestly. Kids are perceptive, James. They know who's there for them. The thought of Jeremy and Melissa being dragged into this mess made my stomach turn, but I knew it was a possibility. All I could do was hope it wouldn't come to that. The final hearing arrived faster than I expected. The courtroom was tense, every word spoken carrying the weight of our future. Claire's lawyer questioned me aggressively, trying to paint me as controlling and emotionally distant. Mark countered with evidence of my involvement in the kids' lives, school events, doctor's appointments, family activities. When Claire took the stand, she cried as she spoke about her love for Jeremy and Melissa, her voice cracking with emotion. They're my whole world, she said, clutching a tissue. I know I've made mistakes, but I would never do anything to hurt them. Her words stirred something in me. Despite everything, I knew she believed what she was saying. But love wasn't enough. Actions mattered, and hers had spoken volumes. When the judge finally announced their decision, my heart pounded in my chest. After reviewing the evidence and considering the best interests of the children, the judge said, I am awarding primary custody to Mr. Richards, with Mrs. Richards granted visitation rights. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was bittersweet. The battle was over, but the scars would linger. Claire broke down in tears, her lawyer comforting her as I sat in stunned silence. I had won, but at what cost? As I left the courtroom that day, I couldn't help but wonder if there was a version of this story where we all came out whole. For now, though, I had my kids, my truth, and a chance to rebuild. And that was enough. The first few days after the court's decision were a blur. I had fought so hard for this outcome, yet the reality of it didn't feel like a victory. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that came with endings. Claire had packed her things and left the day after the ruling, moving into a small apartment across town. The kids were staying with me, but the weight of their confusion and sadness was palpable. Melissa, my youngest, clung to me like a shadow. Every time I left the room, she would follow, her small hand gripping the edge of my shirt. Are you going to leave too, Daddy? She asked one evening, her voice trembling. I crouched down to her level, brushing her hair away from her tear-streaked face. Never, I said firmly. I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. You and Jeremy are my world. Jeremy, on the other hand, had retreated into himself. My once chatty, curious son now spent hours alone in his room, headphones on, staring at his computer screen. I knew he was struggling, but every time I tried to talk to him, he shut me out. Jeremy, I said one afternoon, knocking gently on his door. Can we talk? His muffled response came after a long pause. I'm busy. I opened the door anyway, stepping inside. I know this has been hard on you, I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. It's hard on all of us. But I'm here if you ever want to talk about it. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the game he was playing. It's whatever, he muttered. It's not whatever, I said softly. It's okay to feel upset. Or angry. Or confused. Finally, he turned to me, his face a mixture of frustration and sadness. Why did Mom have to leave? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. How could I explain something so complex to an 11-year-old? Your mom made some choices that hurt our family, I said carefully. But that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. She does. He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the floor. I miss her. I know, I said, my voice breaking. It's okay to miss her. Balancing work and parenting was a juggling act I hadn't fully prepared for. Between school drop-offs, soccer practice, and piano lessons, I barely had time to think. But in some ways, the chaos was a blessing. It kept me from dwelling on everything that had happened. Still, there were moments when the weight of it all caught up to me. Late at night, after the kids were asleep, I would sit in the quiet of the house, staring at the empty space where Claire's things used to be. The memories would flood back. Holidays, anniversaries, the little inside jokes that had once made us feel unbreakable. But those memories were like glass shards now, cutting deep every time I reached for them. One evening I got a call from Claire. Her name flashing on my phone screen sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I hesitated before answering. "Hello? James," she said, her voice hesitant. "I just wanted to check in. How are the kids?" "They're fine," I said curtly. "Adjusting." She sighed. "I miss them." "Then maybe you should have thought about that before you destroyed our family," I snapped, the anger bubbling to the surface. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I know I hurt you," she said finally. "But I'm still their mother. Can't we find a way to make this work?" "Make what work, Claire?" "You had your chance to make it work, and you threw it away." I exhaled sharply, trying to keep my voice steady. "You'll see them during your visitation. That's what we agreed to." Her voice broke. "I just want them to know I love them." "They know," I said, my tone softening despite myself. "But they're hurting too. You need to show them, not just tell them." The next weekend, the kids spent their first night at Claire's new apartment. I tried to play it cool, pretending I was fine, but the empty house felt unbearable. I ended up driving to the park and sitting on a bench, watching the world go by. When they came back the next day, Melissa ran to me immediately, wrapping her arms around my waist. "I missed you, Daddy," she said, her voice muffled against my shirt. "I missed you too, sweetheart," I said, holding her close. Jeremy was more subdued, but he gave me a small smile as he walked past. "It was okay," he said when I asked about their time with Claire. I didn't push for details. I was just glad to have them home. As the weeks turned into months, I started to find my rhythm as a single parent. The house felt less empty, the routine less overwhelming. I even began to enjoy the little moments, making breakfast together, helping with homework, reading bedtime stories. But moving forward didn't mean forgetting. There were still nights when the weight of it all pressed down on me, when the anger and sadness threatened to pull me under. On those nights I reminded myself why I was doing this, for Jeremy, for Melissa, for the life we still had ahead of us. One day, as I was cleaning out the garage, I came across an old photo album. Flipping through the pages, I saw snapshots of the life Claire and I had built together, the day we bought the house, the kids' first birthdays, vacations at the beach. I felt a lump in my throat as I closed the album, placing it back on the shelf. Those memories would always be a part of me, but they didn't define my future. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was mine to walk. And I wasn't walking it alone. Life began to settle into a new rhythm, though it wasn't without its challenges. The kids were adjusting, slowly but surely. Melissa seemed to regain her spark as the weeks turned into months, her laughter filling the house again. Jeremy remained quieter than before, but he was starting to open up more, especially during the moments we spent together working on his school projects or kicking a soccer ball in the yard. Claire, for her part, was adhering to the visitation schedule. She picked up the kids every other weekend and tried to be as involved as she could. I couldn't deny her effort, but our interactions remained terse and transactional. Every handoff was a reminder of the life we'd once shared and the distance between us now. One evening, as I was helping Melissa with her math homework, my phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "Can we meet for coffee? Just to talk?" I stared at the screen, torn between curiosity and irritation. Part of me wanted to ignore her, but another part, a quieter, more rational part, knew we needed to find some kind of middle ground for the sake of the kids. The next day, we met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. Claire looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her coffee cup. "I just wanted to thank you," she began, her voice soft. for being a good father to them, for keeping things stable. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her tone. They're my kids, Claire. That's never going to change. I know, she said, meeting my gaze. But I also know I hurt you. I ruined things. And I've been thinking a lot about how to fix that. I sipped my coffee, letting her words sink in. You can't fix it, I said finally. But you can do better. For them. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. I will. Over time, the wounds began to heal, though the scars remained. I threw myself into work and parenting, finding a strange sense of fulfillment in the routines I'd once taken for granted. The kids and I started new traditions: Friday movie nights, Saturday pancake breakfasts, and spontaneous trips to the park or the beach. At first, it felt like I was compensating for what they'd lost, but eventually it became clear we weren't just patching up old memories. We were creating new ones. One day, Jeremy surprised me by asking, "Do you think you'll ever get married again?" The question caught me off guard. I don't know, I admitted. Right now, I'm just focused on you and your sister. He nodded thoughtfully. You deserve to be happy too, Dad. His words stayed with me, a seed of possibility planted in my mind. For so long, I'd been consumed by anger and sadness, but maybe it was time to start thinking about what came next. A few weeks later, at a neighborhood barbecue, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Emily. She was funny, down to earth, and had a sharp wit that kept me on my toes. We talked for hours, sharing stories about parenting and life. By the end of the evening, I found myself smiling in a way I hadn't in months. We exchanged numbers, and though I wasn't ready to jump into anything serious, it felt good to take that first step towards something new. As time went on, Claire and I managed to find a semblance of peace. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but we learned how to navigate the delicate balance of co-parenting. There were moments of tension, but there were also moments of understanding, small glimmers of the friendship we'd once shared. One day, Claire invited me to her apartment to discuss the kids' schedules. While I was there, I noticed a stack of letters on her coffee table. They were addressed to Jeremy and Melissa, written in Claire's neat handwriting. I've been writing to them, she explained, noticing my gaze. I want them to know how much I love them, even if I can't always show it the way I should. Her vulnerability took me by surprise. For the first time in a long time, I saw a version of Claire that reminded me of why I'd fallen in love with her all those years ago. It didn't change the past, but it gave me hope for the future. Keep doing that, I said. It matters. 2 years after the divorce, life looked completely different. The kids were thriving, Melissa had joined a dance team, and Jeremy was excelling in his advanced math class. They still spent weekends with Claire, and while it wasn't always smooth, it worked. I'd started seeing Emily more regularly, and though we were taking things slow, it felt right. She understood the complexities of my situation and never tried to rush me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. One evening, as the four of us sat around the dinner table, Jeremy looked up from his plate with a smile. You know, Dad, I think we're going to be okay. His words hit me like a wave of relief, washing away the doubts and fears I'd carried for so long. Yeah, I said, smiling back at him. I think we are. The journey hadn't been easy, and the scars would always be there. But we'd made it through the storm, stronger and more united than ever. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to embrace whatever came next.